Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brad Harbison. I want to welcome you to today's webinar on managing cockroaches presented by Syngenta. As you all know, cockroach control can be complicated due to issues such as bait aversion, potential resistance problems, bacteria transmission, and others. During the next hour, we'll hear from a pair of pest management experts who will speak on these and other cockroach control related topics. We're happy to have as our speakers Dr. Nicky Gallagher, who's a Technical Services Manager at Syngenta, and Dr. Ameya Gondhalekar, Research Assistant and Professor at the Center for Urban Industrial Pest Management at Purdue University. One quick note to pass along before we get started. Today's webinar is interactive, and we encourage everyone to ask questions throughout. You can do so by typing them into the question box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. However, we are going to hold all questions until the end so that our presenters will have enough time to finish. And with that, we'll turn things over to Nicky Gallagher.
Thank you so much, Brad, and thank you for hosting today's webinar. I just wanted to say that big thank you to PCT Magazine, and good afternoon to everybody joining us today. I hope you are all having a productive bug season, and we definitely do appreciate you guys taking the time out to join us today. So we have an excellent presentation lined up for you today that will be given by Dr. Ameya Gondhalekar. But first, I'd like to just take a few minutes to share some of the work that we have been doing at Syngenta for the management of cockroaches. Now, as we all know, it's ants that tend to own the #1 spot for PMP services. But cockroach control is still a steady revenue stream for most PMPs, and it's an essential service for their customers. According to a survey published in the 2016 State of the Cockroach Market by PCT Magazine, nearly 50% of the PMPs said cockroach control makes up 16 to more than 30% of their overall revenue service. And furthermore, many expect that this number is going to increase. So cockroach control is an essential service and does remain the backbone of the pest management industry. The good news is that PMPs in that same survey from 2016 confirmed that they feel confident that they have the tools and the know-how required to gain control and claim victory over most, if not all, of the cockroach species that we deal with. However, if we look at the top 5 problematic cockroach species, only German cockroaches are really causing the most concern for PMPs. They lead this problematic area above all other species, with 90% of the respondents dubbing them as the most problematic. So it's imperative that we continue to have the best tools available to control these pests. Now, one of the top choices for cockroach control is, of course, gel baits. And if you look at all of these factors that I've listed here in this slide, this is what we take into account as a manufacturer when we are developing an excellent cockroach bait. We have to develop a matrix that is highly palatable. It has to be physically stable, and even all the way down just to the user experience. So it should apply with ease. It should have consistent performance, and it should have 0 to low odor and shouldn't have any staining. But the active ingredient in that matrix is just as important. That AI has to be chemically stable and compatible with the matrix. You have to have a really excellent toxicological profile. It should kill the cockroaches fairly fast, but slow enough that you can still gain the benefit of a transfer effect like we see in secondary or tertiary kill. Now, the last time Syngenta launched a cockroach bait was close to about 10 years ago in 2006 when we launched Advion cockroach bait. But since that time, Syngenta has not stopped investing into the research and development of our cockroach baits. In fact, Syngenta has one of the largest and most intense German cockroach resistance management programs in the industry, and that's through our close collaborations with Purdue University researchers. So part of our stewardship for new technology at Syngenta, and to avoid any development of resistance, is to continue to evolve and stay ahead of the cockroaches. So through our research and development, we have these new matrices, which are key to avoid aversion, and we also have new active ingredients, which are essential to prevent physiological resistance. So we're very excited to bring 2 new cockroach baits into the marketplace in 2017. And I just briefly want to tell you about those 2 cockroach baits. Our first is Advion Evolution, and our second bait that we're launching at the same time is Optigard Cockroach Gel Bait. Advion Evolution is really built to advance the standard for cockroach bait control and to ensure that Syngenta is providing the best possible tools to the pest management industry. Optigard is also a new bait, a unique active ingredient, along with a differentiated matrix. And this AI is a abamectin bait that is faster acting than other baits that are currently in the marketplace. Now, just a little bit more of a detail on Advion Evolution, if you haven't heard about it yet. It still contains the active ingredient indoxacarb that we have in our current Advion, so that same reliable active ingredient, but we've really enhanced the formulation and developed this to be more attractive than our standard Advion cockroach gel bait. But you still get all of those same key features in that safety profile and all the way to user friendliness, from non-staining to no running. And this is really going to help us to avoid any development of aversion with our Advion baits. Just a little bit of data to show you. I promise I only have 2 data slides, and this is the first one. So this is comparing our standard Advion in green versus our new Advion Evolution in blue. So that first graph on the left-hand side of the screen is looking at consumption of our baits. And this is looking at a really tough strain called T164. It became really famous in the 1990s, known for its glucose aversion. So that strain became an issue because it refused to eat any cockroach bait. And in fact, because of these issues in the marketplace, that was why Advion was launched in the first place. So Advion was developed with sugar aversion in mind. So we don't have any of those sugars in our regular Advion. And you can see we get great consumption with our Advion in green. But over time, we've developed our Advion Evolution matrix. We've looked at different food ingredients and how they react together. And what we find when this same cockroach strain is given Advion Evolution, even though they haven't been starved, they go through a binging effect when they are given Evolution, that we get a 60% increase in the amount of bait that they eat. So if we look at the mortality rate on the right-hand side of the screen, both of our Advion baits here are very successful in providing a high level of mortality. But because of that increase in consumption, we're getting a much faster knockdown in the cockroaches. So by day 1, we've knocked down about 70% of the cockroaches compared to about 40% with our standard Advion. So a great increase in consumption due to this binging effect. And if we take a little bit of a closer look at Optigard, so Optigard is a new matrix and a new active ingredient. It contains emamectin benzoate, a very effective active ingredient. It actually targets the cockroach at 2 different target sites. So it's going to target the muscle and the nervous system. And this actually causes continuous flow of chloride ions in those target sites, which results in eventual paralysis of the cockroach. So this is a 2nd generation abamectin. It is faster acting than current abamectins out on the marketplace. And because it's a new matrix and a new active ingredient, this is going to be a really excellent rotational partner for your IPM programs. So just a quick look at the data here. We have Advion Evolution in green, and we have Optigard in blue. This is a real world German cockroach infestation, highly infested apartment. We have no other form of control going out. We only used one tube of bait at the beginning of this study. So by day 7, after just one tube of bait, we had a 73% reduction with Advion Evolution and a 63% reduction with Optigard. We did apply a little bit more bait as that study went on. So by day 45, we achieved approximately 90 to about 94% control, which is really exceptional and what we're looking for in these tough situations where the conditions are really conducive to cockroaches and no other form of control is going on. So again, at the end of this study, we actually used less than 2 syringes of bait for these highly infested apartments. And we went from an average count of about 150 cockroaches to about 9 cockroaches for Evolution and similar numbers for the Optigard site. So very good results in these tough situations. So in summary, we're very excited to provide 2 new cockroach baits that can be incorporated into an IPM program and also part of it as a rotation strategy. And at Syngenta, we know cockroach control is challenging, and our goal at Syngenta is to continue providing new tools to ensure product performance and, of course, to ensure a life uninterrupted. So thank you so much for listening today. And now, with great pleasure, I am going to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Ameya Gondhalekar is a research assistant professor and sponsored product research manager in the Center for Urban and Industrial Pest Management at Purdue University. He is originally from Mumbai, India, where he received his bachelor's and master's degree in agricultural sciences and entomology. He completed his PhD at the University of Florida, working with German cockroach toxicology and resistance management. Dr. Gondhalekar has experience in working with biology and management of all major urban insect pests, and he is currently working with cockroaches and bedbugs. The goal of his research is to identify physiological weak links in insect development that can be targeted to improve current control strategies or devise novel control methods. And in addition to his work, he's looking at finding new ways to overcome insecticide resistance in urban pests and improve IPM techniques. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gondhalekar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Gallagher, for the very nice introduction. And before I begin, I want to thank PCT, Brad Harbison, and Syngenta for sponsoring this webinar. And also good morning to everyone who is joining this webinar from the West Coast, and good afternoon to everyone who is joining this webinar from other parts of the country. Before I begin, I want to make sure everyone is able to view my screen and my audio is okay. So let me go ahead and start with this presentation. As you know from the advertisement for this particular webinar, the title is Latest Solutions and Tactics for Controlling Tough Cockroaches. Although I'll be referring to different cockroach species here, because German cockroaches are the most problematic and the most abundant pest found here in urban areas in the United States, most of the talk is going to be centered around German cockroaches. Here is the outline of my talk. I'll begin by talking about different pest cockroaches and their life cycle, then briefly go over significance of cockroaches as pests and why people like to get rid of them. Then we'll move on to discuss some of the cockroach behaviors that are important from a perspective of inspecting for cockroach infestations, as well as understanding how some of the cockroach behaviors have been exploited for their own control. How we used to control cockroaches back in the 1970s and how we are controlling them at the present day, has changed significantly. So I'll give a brief historical perspective of how things have changed. Then majority of the time of this webinar I'll spend in talking about assessment-based cockroach control. This assessment-based cockroach control or urban pest control idea is something that is being promoted by the Housing and Urban Development and also researchers such as Dr. Deanie Miller from Virginia Tech. So I'll kind of talk about how you can use an assessment-based cockroach control program to improve your success in controlling cockroaches. Then I'll end this talk by summarizing the things that I have mentioned in this presentation, and then I'll be happy to take any questions. So let's first talk about pest cockroaches and their life cycle. There are more than 4,000 species of cockroaches in this world, and most of them live in tropical areas and forests, and not all of them are considered as pests. In fact, more than 90% of the cockroach species that are found are considered as beneficial. Only about 30 species of cockroaches are considered to be of pest significance in urban areas worldwide. As Dr. Gallagher showed the slide about important cockroach species in the United States, there are about 6 different of cockroach species that are considered as pests. First is the German cockroach, the American cockroach, Australian, Oriental, smoky brown, and brown banded. Asian cockroaches have become invasive in the southern states of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, and some others, whereas Turkestan cockroaches have become invasive in the southwest. Not all species that we encounter in the urban areas are found in the indoor environment. Species such as the American cockroach, Australian, Oriental, and smoky brown, as well as Asian and Turkestan cockroaches are peridomestic, which means they do not find shelter in the human households, but in areas surrounding the human household or other food handling structures, and they occasionally visit these structures in search of food and moisture. Species such as the German cockroach and the brown-banded cockroach are considered as strictly domestic, which means they live in indoor environments. However, one example that I'm going to provide you in this talk is about I found German cockroaches hanging out in the soil outside an apartment. So although we consider German cockroaches as strictly domestic, we also find them in the outdoors in some cases, in very rare cases. Whereas the Asian cockroach, which looks very similar to the German cockroach, it mainly lives in the outdoors but visits indoors and are attracted to light in some cases. So let's talk about what makes the German cockroach the most successful pest species in the urban environment. First is that German cockroaches, as compared to other pest cockroaches, they are very small in size. They are 3/4 of an inch in length. They are bronze colored with racing stripes behind their head, and this size of 3/4 inch is among the smallest among all the cockroach species. For example, the American and the Oriental cockroach are pretty big as compared to the German cockroach. If you are looking at brown banded and Asian cockroaches, they are about the same size as the German cockroach. But their small size can be considered as one of the factors for their success as a most successful species in the urban areas. Also, as compared to other cockroach species, the German cockroaches reproduces fairly quickly. A single female is able to produce around 300 to 400 babies in her lifetime, and that's the highest among any pest cockroach species. Also, the generation time, the development time that it takes to develop from egg stage to the adult stage is very short for the German cockroach as compared to any other cockroach species. And these factors have made them more successful as pests in urban areas. So what is the significance of German cockroaches? Why do people like to get rid of them? First, there is a specific odor associated with cockroach infestations, and the places where cockroaches like to hide, they also like to defecate there, which leaves fecal spots, which are unacceptable And cockroaches are also considered as nuisance pests. So people just don't like to be around cockroaches. Also, some people can live around cockroaches, few cockroaches here and there, and they don't have any problem. But certain people and in certain institutions such as wedding or banquet halls, if the people were to find cockroaches, some of them might even have some panic attack. Because of this sensitivity surrounding cockroaches, people are going to spend money on getting rid of them, which is a good thing for the pest control industry. Cockroaches have been a staple for the pest control industry for the past 60, 70 or more years. But at the same time, for the customers or clients, it is an economic burden. In addition to aesthetic and economic implications, cockroaches, because they like to live in filthy areas, they also carry disease-causing microorganisms such as E. coli and Salmonella on their bodies, which can be transmitted physically or mechanically to food or food handling areas. Because of this pathogen transmission ability of cockroaches, you can see health inspectors shutting down restaurants and other places if they find cockroaches above a certain threshold. There are also other factors, medical factors associated with German cockroach infestations. The allergens that are produced by German cockroaches and that are present in the apartments that are infested by German cockroaches can trigger asthma attacks in sensitized individuals, especially small children and also the elderly and the sick. So because of these reasons, cockroach control is very important for the clients to get rid of them. So now we'll switch on to look at some common cockroach behaviors that are important from a perspective of inspecting for cockroach infestations, as well as knowing how these behaviors that cockroaches display are exploited for their own control. First, cockroaches are synanthropic pests, which means they are associated with people and depend on people for food, shelter, and moisture. And because of this, they can be abundantly found in apartments, in homes, in food handling areas, restaurants, as well as animal rearing facilities, where all of this, the food, water, and shelter, are found in abundance. Then cockroaches are nocturnal. That means they are active at night. They are negatively phototrophic, which means they avoid light. If you turn on light, cockroaches are not going to just hang out. They're just going to hide back in a darker spot, run away and hide back in a darker spot. They also don't like to hang out in the open. They like to stay and rest in tight spaces. Because of these three behaviors displayed by the cockroaches, them being nocturnal, them being negatively phototrophic, and them being thigmotactic, when you are going out for inspecting German cockroach infestation in your accounts during the daytime, you're probably not going to find cockroaches out in the open hanging out. They are probably, unless the infestation is very high, they are not going to be on the open. So that means that when you are inspecting for cockroaches, you have to look in the dark places and tight places, such as behind the refrigerator, under the sink, behind wall frames, behind the stove, and other such dark areas and tight places. Cockroaches, although they are not social insects like honeybees or termites, they like to live in groups. You can see here in this picture, they are huddled up in a corner of a cabinet. Then they are coprophagous, which means they like to eat each other's feces. They are emetophagous, which sounds gross, which means they like to eat each other's throw up or body exudates, and also they like to feed on other dead or moribund cockroaches. Basically, they are omnivorous. They eat anything from meat, animal origin products to plant origin products and can survive under harshest of the conditions. The ability of cockroaches to eat their own feces, the body exudates of their siblings, and also on other dead cockroaches has been exploited with the new formulations that we use for pest control, that is the gel bait insecticides. So we have been using gel bait formulations for cockroach control since the mid 1990s, and even sometime before that. And what a gel bait formulation is that it's a very palatable food matrix mixed together with the insecticide, and cockroaches like to eat on it. But not all cockroaches can find the bait sometimes. Sometimes only one cockroach can find the bait and it feeds on the bait. And these insecticides, especially the Advion cockroach bait and the Max Force FC Select bait, which contains fipronil, they are not fast acting. So the cockroaches that have fed upon the bait are able to go to their hiding spot and then defecate the insecticide in their poop and in their body exudates and also start to die. When this starts happening, other insects which have not directly fed on the bait get the insecticide by feeding on insecticide laced poop and also body exudates and dying cockroaches. And that is termed as horizontal transfer of insecticide from insects that have fed on the bait directly to insects that have not fed on the bait directly. And my colleague here at Purdue University had shown that indoxacarb, which is the active ingredient of Advion cockroach bait and also Advion Evolution, this insecticide or bait can be horizontally transferred from recipient insects to insects that have not fed upon the bait and can cause secondary and tertiary mortality. This is something good from a control perspective, but not all baits that are available in the market are able to cause secondary or tertiary mortality. From the baits that we had available in the past years, we know that Advion and Max Force baits can cause secondary or tertiary mortality, but not others. My recent lab research with new Syngenta products, that is Advion Evolution and Optigard cockroach bait, showed that both these new baits cause significant secondary mortality in cockroaches that have not directly fed upon the bait. In this picture shown on the slide, you can see some dead cockroaches, their body exudates, and small baby nymphs, which had not directly fed upon the bait, are kind of feeding on these body exudates. And when I tracked the mortality in these baby nymphs and other adult males of German cockroach, I found significant mortality in the recipient insects or the insects that were feeding upon the adult males that had previously fed on the bait. So both Advion Evolution and Optigard caused significant secondary mortality, and that mortality level was maybe up to 90%. I think it was even better than the Advion cockroach gel bait, the older version of containing indoxacarb. So about 90 to 100% mortality was caused by 7 to 10 days. So this is a good thing when it comes to having that secondary kill or exponential kill effect when some insects are going to feed upon the bait, but them feeding on the bait is also going to expose other insects to this particular insecticide. Then let's talk about the history of cockroach control. One thing that has been common in cockroach control is that although academics have been recommending use of IPM and other measures for controlling cockroaches, insecticides are the major line of defense against this pest, the German cockroach. Before 1990s, we are using spray formulations or dust formulations of residual insecticides such as organophosphates and carbamates. These were conventional insecticides that means they were not reduced risk. So they had a lot of environmental problems as well as resistance issues, and they mainly acted via contact. In the mid-1990s, gel bait formulations were introduced for cockroach control, and as I explained before, gel bait formulation is such that it contains a very palatable food matrix mixed together with a non-repellent reduced risk insecticide, and these mainly act via feeding. Around the same time, granular bait formulations were also introduced, and spray formulations containing reduced risk insecticides such as Arilon were also introduced. So I said that gel bait formulations, we have switched mainly to gel bait formulations of insecticides since the mid-1990s or late 1990s. But during that time of 20 years from maybe say 96, 98 to the present time, 2017, gel bait and other formulations as well as active ingredients that we use for cockroach control have evolved over the past 10 to 15 years. For example, different companies, manufacturers have different line of products containing different active ingredients and different bait matrices. And here I'm going to give an example of Syngenta products that are available. So before the two new products were introduced, we had Advion cockroach gel, which was one of the market leader for cockroach control. Then Arilon, containing indoxacarb as active ingredient, which has a spray formulation or a residual insecticide, was introduced maybe in 2010. Before that, Advion insect granules were available for outdoor cockroach control, and as well as the IGR product, Archer, and the clean out product, Demand CS, were available. Now, in the past month or so, earlier this month, two new baits were introduced for cockroach control, Advion Evolution, which contains again indoxacarb but a different bait matrix, and Optigard cockroach gel bait, which contains a novel active ingredient, emamectin benzoate. So as over time, the products that we have been using for cockroach control have been evolving, and I just gave you an example of Syngenta products, but even other companies have their products that are evolving, and so are German cockroaches evolving. So since we began to heavily depend upon gel bait formulations for cockroach control, cockroaches have developed resistance to these gel baits, and the resistance can be of two types. First is the behavioral resistance, in which cockroaches don't get resistant to the insecticide that is present in the bait, but they are able to detect the sugars that are present in this bait as something toxic or something bitter in taste, and then they avoid feeding on this bait, leading to control failures. This Bait-Aversion or glucose aversion was first detected back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and Dr. Julius Silverman, who is a distinguished professor of urban entomology at NC State University, he developed a technique of overcoming this type of resistance back in the late 90s or early 90s. And what manufacturers have been doing to overcome this kind of bait-aversion resistance is that they have been changing the sugars or the composition of sugars that are used in these baits. And by doing that, they are able to overcome this bait-aversion resistance to a certain extent. Changing the sugars in the bait matrix is not very challenging from a perspective of regulatory agencies such as the EPA, but changing the active ingredient that is present in these baits is a major challenge, and manufacturers have to go through a significant level of approval process to bring new active ingredients to the market. What my work at Florida and at Purdue University has focused on is the ability of cockroaches to develop physiological resistance to the active ingredient or insecticide that is present in this bait. When cockroaches develop physiological resistance to the active ingredient, the insecticides are either broken down quickly by insects' own enzymes, or the target site to which the insecticide is supposed to bind is modified in such a way that the insecticide is ineffective. So both products as well as cockroaches have evolved over time, and that is the reason we are proposing let me go back and explain this to give you some example of how physiological resistance to the active ingredient has increased over time. I'm going to give you an example of fipronil. So right when fipronil containing baits, that is Max Force FC Select, were introduced back in the late 90s, researchers found that field strains of German cockroaches had just 7-fold resistance to fipronil as compared to the laboratory susceptible strains. 4 years later, this resistance level was around 17-fold in field-collected cockroaches. And some research that I did in Florida, I found that cockroaches were 35-fold resistant to fipronil in 2006-2008. So you can see a gradual increase in physiological insecticide resistance to this active ingredient fipronil over time. And if you are to collect more cockroaches now, they might even have a little higher resistance to this particular active or other actives. So given this risk of bait aversion as well as physiological resistance development, sorry, I need to explain this as well. So I don't want you to get an impression that insecticide resistance is the only thing that's affecting cockroach control or bait performance in the field. There are different factors. One factor is resistance to the active ingredient, which can be enzyme mediated or it can be target site mediated. Another factor that I explained before is sugar or bait aversion. And another factor is competing food sources or sanitation. So remember, cockroaches have to feed upon the bait to acquire the active ingredient that can kill them. But if there are competing food sources that are non-toxic, then probably cockroaches are going to prefer those over anything else. Here you can see a pet food bowl with some kind of food in it, and there were maybe at least 100 cockroaches or more in it, and they were just having a good time. So if this is the case, cockroaches are not going to feed on the bait that you put out. So what I want to stress here is that there could be resistance to the active ingredient, there could be sugar or bait aversion, and there could be sanitation issues. Either each of these factors could act independently and reduce the efficacy of bait, or they can act synergistically to reduce the efficacy of bait. And because of these factors, what we are proposing, what Housing and Urban Development HUD is proposing, and what other researchers are proposing is the use of assessment-based control approach for German cockroaches and other urban pests. And this assessment-based cockroach control is consisted of 4 different steps. First, and I'll go through each of this step one by one and give you case study examples at the same time. First is inspection and monitoring. So when you go to a cockroach infested account, you need to find out what the population hotspot is, because if you are able to identify the correct location where cockroaches are hanging out and put the bait application right next to it, then your chances of getting good control are much better. I'm not going to go over the details of where to inspect for cockroaches, but I downloaded this picture from the website Do My Own Pest Control, and it shows various areas where you can find cockroaches in the kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom. Then I'm going to share my experience from account in the state of Illinois, Indiana, specifically Illinois. Where this was a multifamily apartment, and I was working there since 2013, 2014. And residents all the time complained about cockroaches crawling into the apartments from the front door area. And this happened for consecutive summers, so it wasn't just in one summer that I encountered this. Different residents kept telling me the same story. And at first, I kind of laughed off at them, and I thought they were misidentifying ants for cockroaches, and hence they were telling that story. But then one year we decided to inspect, and we did find some cockroaches out in the soil area, and I have a video for that. So you can see cockroaches coming out of the soil there, tiny, yeah. What you see coming out of that soil area or cockroaches.
Sorry.
So the point here is that you always have to listen to your residents, because when you are inspecting, you are probably going to be there for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or up to an hour, but your residents are always there. So when we found these cockroaches out in the soil, what we did was, in addition to applying bait in the indoors, we also did a granular bait application of Advion insect granules on the outdoors, and that seemed to help with the control significantly. Another importance of inspection and monitoring is that if you are dealing with American cockroaches or some other peridomestic species, the control measures or the location of the control measures that you are going to put out are going to be different than those for German cockroaches. Also, German and Asian cockroaches look almost similar, so you need to know that although they look similar, Asian cockroaches are able to fly, whereas German cockroaches are not able to fly. And then, if you correctly identify the species during the inspection, you will probably end up applying correct control measures at the correct location. So after inspection and monitoring, the second step of the assessment-based cockroach control program is educating your clients, tenants, or housing administrators. And as we all know, and as I have explained before, sanitation is a major issue that can affect the efficacy of baits or bait consumption. And competing food sources, such as those shown in the pictures here, are always in problem because cockroaches are always going to go for alternative food, not the toxic food that we are putting out in the bait. So here I have a couple of case studies to share with you. So I was using, and this was in maybe 2014, 2015, the old version of the Advion Indoxacar bait, that is Advion cockroach gel, in an apartment with more than 1,000 cockroaches on sticky traps in an overnight count. But I was still able to achieve more than 90% control in about a month. And the reason I was able to achieve this control was the resident cooperated by removing rotting food, rotting potatoes from the kitchen area. And when that issue was solved, it was no problem in getting control. But if that issue had not been addressed, then it would have been very difficult to control cockroaches using just gel bait insecticides. Another experience that I had was I used the new Advion Evolution bait in an apartment that had trap count on sticky traps of 300 cockroaches in a period of 24 hours. I used only Advion Evolution in this particular apartment, and within a week, the trap count went down from 300 cockroaches to less than 30 cockroaches. In addition to Advion Evolution being very effective, as mentioned by Dr. Gallagher in her slides, resident cooperation in emptying out the cabinets full of empty grocery bags and paper mail helped a lot. In this photo on the slide, you can see paper mail in this particular drawer full of cockroach poop, and that was a very good hiding spot for cockroaches, and I have a video for that as well. Hopefully it plays well. So what I want to show through this video is that, just within a week, I saw hundreds of dead cockroaches after putting out Advion Evolution in this cabinet. So you can see how many cockroaches were dead in just 1 week after putting out Advion Evolution. First, the bait was effective, and the second factor was that the resident cooperated by helping out to clean out some of the harborage spots for cockroaches. So resident education is important. Another factor that I always encounter, especially in heavily infested apartments, is that residents are frustrated with cockroach infestation. So even if you go out there and put bait insecticides, they are going to be willing to use over-the-counter products and spray them over the bait, and that greatly reduces efficacy of gel baits and consumption. And sometimes I have also encountered residents, when we are putting out gel baits, they think we are not doing anything. They want us to use some kind of BNG tank mix and a BNG sprayer, and then they are satisfied that we have treated those apartments for cockroaches. If you are in such a situation where you need to use spray products along with gel baits, then you can use some non-repellent insecticides such as Arilon and Archer, which is a insect growth regulator, and Arilon, which contains indoxacarb. In a lab study that I did in 2015, I sprayed Advion cockroach gel bait, the older version, with both Arilon and Archer, and I did not find any reduction in bait consumption. So that was good. So we can recommend for sure that using non-repellent insecticides along with gel baits is a good way in case you want to get better control or if you want to satisfy your customers. The next step in the assessment-based cockroach control program is decision making and implementation of interventions. And if you have done inspection properly, you will know what species you are dealing with, what are the population hotspots, or in a multi-family apartment, which apartment is heavily infested. You will also, if you do inspection properly, you will also understand which structural and people issues need to be resolved for you to be successful in controlling cockroaches. And by just looking at the history of insecticide use at a particular account, if that is available, you should be able to identify which insecticide formulation might work the best in that particular situation. And based on the insecticide use history and records, you can also tell whether there have been insecticide resistance or bait aversion issues. As I said, you have different formulations available for cockroach control. Of course, gel baits are the most go-to products, important products within a cockroach IPM program. You have non-repellent spray formulations, and here I'm giving examples of Syngenta products, but each manufacturer has different products available. There are insecticides or desiccant dusts. Then there are clean-out products such as Demand CS. There are pyrethroid sprays. There are mixture products that contain pyrethroids and neonicotinoids, but you have to be careful if you are using any pyrethroid or mixture products. Don't use them simultaneously with baits because there could be some aversion issue or repellency issue associated with those. Again, because you have so many formulations available, different options available, you can also choose one product to use in single family homes. You can use another product or array of products in a multi-family housing apartment. The products that you use in food handling areas could be different than those you use in hospitals, as well as wedding or banquet halls. During, I think, early fall or spring time, especially in the up north, when the temperatures are pretty warm, you can also find cockroaches breeding in the school buses and other transit system, public transit systems. And that is because, there is food material available in these transportation systems. So approach that you would use for this particular situation would be different from an apartment. So the take-home message here is that one-size-fits-all approach does not work. You can analyze the situation yourself and decide which product is going to work the best in a particular situation. And here, after this, I'm going to give you an example of a field study that I did in high-rise apartment building in Indiana. So when I first surveyed this building, I also got some information on what insecticides had been used by the previous pest control industry or the pest control industry that was serving that unit. And they were following some kind of a green pest management approach where they were depending heavily upon sticky traps and other spray insecticides. And bait insecticide use was not significant over at this location. So based on that information, I was able to make a decision that yes, gel baits can work better in this area because there hasn't been any history. Then the amount of gel bait that I applied was based on the number of cockroaches that I found on the sticky traps. If I found less cockroaches, 15 to 30 cockroaches, I used one-fourth of a syringe. If there were up to 100 cockroaches, I used the entire bait tube. And if there were more, I used more. And this approach is similar to that was published by Dr. Deanie Miller from Virginia Tech in a PCT magazine. I don't have the details for that, but if you want, I can easily share that with you. And after using Advion Evolution at this location, no other control measures were used, such as IPM or other formulations. I was able to get up to 98% population control in 6 weeks or 42 to 45 days. So one other thing that I did after initial bait application at week 0, I also did some follow-up measures. So at week 2 or at week 1, I went back and did population monitoring using sticky traps. And by doing the follow-up measures, I was able to tell that the treatments that I was putting out there were in fact working in reducing the population numbers. And if those treatments that I was putting out there, if they were not working, I could have made a decision to use other formulations or do some more IPM type of work in those apartments. So if you include follow-up measures in your cockroach control program, that is going to help immensely in both reducing the cockroach numbers as well as keeping your customers happy. This step of following follow-up measures in a cockroach control program may include assessing the success of the initial insecticide application using sticky traps. If you do get good control, then you probably don't have to do anything else. Maybe if there are little more cockroaches, you can put out some more bait. But if cockroach population numbers are instead of decreasing, if they are increasing, then you may have to decide to fix issues that may have impacted success, and this may include fixing some sanitation issues or other issues that are impacting the success of a bait. If you think the population numbers are too high and you added too little bait in the first place, then you can apply more insecticide, or you can use other formulations to get the population numbers down. So for example, this is the study done by Dr. Changlu Wang of Rutgers University. It was published in the PCT Magazine in 2016. So I think these apartments were problem apartments to begin with, and there were a lot of sanitation issues in that, if I understand correctly. So instead of just using Advion cockroach gel bait, not the Advion Evolution, but the older version, Advion cockroach gel bait, Dr. Wang used IPM measures and boric acid along with the Advion cockroach gel bait. And by doing that, he was able to reduce the population numbers or the trap count from over 40 to less than 5 cockroaches in about 7 weeks, and then maintain them up to almost 6 to 7 months. So if you are going into apartments where you think gel bait formulations may not work, you may decide to incorporate some IPM strategies in your cockroach control program along with use of other formulations for cockroach control. There could be insecticide resistance issue associated with cockroaches that you are dealing with, and I'm doing a big project with funding from Housing and Urban Development on which resistance management strategies work best for German cockroaches, and I'm doing that in collaboration with other colleagues in the Urban Center at Purdue University. But we don't have any data to share as of now, but maybe by next year, we'll have publications as well as presentation with that data for you. But right now, for resistance management, what we are recommending is using a cockroach generation-based product rotation approach. So remember, I mentioned earlier, and as well as Dr. Gallagher mentioned, that cockroach life cycle for one generation to go from egg stage to adult stage, which is reproductively active, is about 3 months. So if you use product 1 for the first 3 months and then switch out to product 2 after the first 3 months, where there could be a new generation, and then after 3 months to switch to product 3, that is the best strategy I think we are recommending right now. When it comes to rotation, with the new introduction of baits that Syngenta has brought to the market, you can use product 1, that is Advion Evolution, for the first 3 months, then switch to a different active ingredient, that is Optigard cockroach gel bait, and then come back to Advion cockroach, the older version of indoxacarb containing bait. If you want to rotate with some spray products, you can do Archer or Arilon. And I'm just giving this as an example, but there are many other products out there that you can incorporate in this rotation strategy. With that, I think I'll start concluding this talk by giving you hitting on some important points that I have mentioned in this talk. First, gel baits are still an integral part of any cockroach control program. So although you can depend on many other treatment options or formulations or even IPM strategies, gel baits have to be a part of this particular strategy. However, one size fits all approach does not work. You have to analyze through your inspection and experience, you have to kind of make a decision on which product is going to work for which particular account. Then doing and following various steps of the assessment-based cockroach or pest control programs such as inspection, monitoring, education, decision-making, and follow-up are key for success of the program or any cockroach control program that you're running in multifamily housing or even in single-family housing. Although this assessment-based cockroach control protocol could be very time-consuming and expensive in the beginning, in the long run, it will pay off big time, I think. And that is by reducing the amount of efforts you are putting into it over time. And remember, always listen to your clients as they may have more information on where pests are hiding out. Remember, we are going there to inspect these accounts only during maybe the daytime, and we might be there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or little more. But residents are living there for 24 hours, 7 days a week. And it's always good to get some insights from them, although depending on it completely also might not be good. Then if you are finding out that there are some issues such as residents spraying pyrethroid aerosols on the bait that you have applied, or if there are sanitation issues, it's important to work with residents to overcome those issues. Then lastly, the threat of insecticide resistance development to gel baits or any other formulations that are out there is very real, and hence following a rotation-based strategy with different active ingredients and bait matrices and formulation should be followed. Hopefully, based on the research that we are doing here at Purdue, we should be able to come with more information on how to better manage insecticide resistance in cockroaches maybe by next year. Hopefully, if we follow the assessment-based cockroach control program and the steps of it, we won't get to a situation where we have to tear down buildings and apartments and build new ones because of cockroach infestations. This news story is from 2015, where I think presidential palace was rebuilt because of American cockroach infestation. With that, I would like to take any questions, and again, I thank Syngenta as well as PCT for organizing this webinar. Thank you.
And thank you, Ameya.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ameya. It's Brad back here. We're going to do the Q&A, and Nicky's going to rejoin us as well. We did get some questions come in during your presentation, Ameya, and again, we'll continue to field them as we go through the Q&A. And again, go ahead and ask. You can ask those by typing them into the question box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. The first question we had was, how do the products, the Advion Evolution and Optigard, perform in extreme heat? How quickly does it degrade?
To answer that question, I have Nicky. Do you want me to answer that question?
Sure. Yeah. If you want to, speak to your experiences on that too, Ameya, that's fine.
Okay. So the apartments that we are working in the high-rise building, they were elderly housing, and some of the apartments, they like to keep their thermostat up to maybe 90, 95, and even with that, in such apartments, I was able to achieve good control. So no issues there. And in a lab trial that I did with both Advion Evolution and Optigard, I had aged them for 3 months under lab, just normal room temperature conditions. And after 3 months, when I offered them the dried bait, some of them finished the bait in its entirety. So that's what the experience I have with these two products.
Yeah, I would say, very similar response from our end. Before we launch a product, we put it through a whole bunch of trial situations, and the level of control and physical stability of both of these baits are going to be up to the same standard of what you expect out of our current Advion bait if you're familiar with that. So we age it, we put it under very hot conditions, to the extreme that it might simulate if the bait had been sitting in the back of your truck on a really hot summer day. So when you go to apply it, maybe it might be ever so slightly runny, but the active ingredient is not going to break down and it's still going to be palatable for the cockroaches.
Next question we had was, will the Advion Evolution and Optigard gel baits have the same relative dying time as original Advion cockroach gel bait?
I can give you my 2 cents there quickly. So with Advion Evolution and Advion, the active ingredient is still indoxacarb. So how quickly a population will be controlled is there might be some variability because there's different populations of German cockroaches, and just due to the natural variability on how they respond, there might be differences. But the trends that we see, whether it's in the lab or the field, is we tend to get this binging effect when cockroaches go to eat on Advion Evolution. There's a phagostimulant response where the cockroaches really get a belly full of bait. And when they are doing that, we tend to get faster control with Advion Evolution if you compare that to standard Advion. With Optigard, so that's emamectin benzoate. So it's a complete different mode of action compared to indoxacarb. It's slower acting than indoxacarb, maybe by, just a couple of days difference in terms of seeing a dramatic knockdown in the population. But if you compare emamectin benzoate to other abamectin baits, and we see this in cockroaches and we see this in crop control where abamectins are used for Lepidopteran pests, second generation abamectins such as emamectin benzoate are much faster. So just to give you an idea, we've tested multiple strains, and we were comparing emamectin benzoate, which is Optigard, versus other abamectins. We're actually able to get a range of a speed of control that is 15% to 70% faster compared to the others in that same class of insecticides.
Hey, Nikki, I got to apologize. I misread that question by one word, and it makes all the difference in the world. So I apologize. All right. The question was, will the Advion Evolution and Optigard gel baits have the same relative drying time as original Advion cockroach gel?
Gotcha. Yeah, I would say they're both very similar, and I think Ameya, gave a very good response on what he found with aging the cockroach baits. That over time they do lose moisture, but we've aged these baits in some situations beyond 30 days, and it's still attractive to the cockroaches. There might be a slight skin that forms over the bait, but the cockroaches will still go over that and can get a lethal dose.
Right. Yeah, I did it for 90 days in the lab, and they dried in the first 15 days or so, or maybe 7 days, depending on what situation you have. But they were still palatable, and all the cockroaches went after it. So the drying time was probably the same between Advion and new products. So.
Next question we had was, we've had a large increase of American roach populations inside residential structures. Any treatment recommendations using the new Syngenta products?
I tested Optigard bait as well as Advion Evolution against American cockroaches, and I think Advion Evolution was more faster in killing the American cockroaches, and again that may have been due to increased consumption as mentioned by Dr. Gallagher. So I found that, and even comparing abamectin-containing baits that were already on the market to Optigard. Optigard was much faster in killing American cockroaches under lab situation, maybe I think at least by 7 to 10 days. So these two products are, I think, much faster in killing American cockroaches.
The next question we had, and I'm not sure which product this was in regards to, so maybe you can answer it to both, but it was, how often are you recommending it be reapplied, and how long is it palatable once it's been applied?
Dr. Gallagher, you want to go with that?
Yeah, sure. So I don't think there's a particular standard. It's going to be based on the local situation. So for us, when we go out and test these in real sites, we base our decision to put out more bait based on the population, getting back to this assessment-based control. So we always put out sticky traps. So if we come back after our first week of baiting and we have a certain level of cockroaches, that gives us an idea as to whether, we should put out half a tube of bait or if we should put out another tube of bait. What was the other part of that question, Brad?
How long is it palatable once it's been applied?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, so like we mentioned before, it's going to be the most palatable when you put it out. If the cockroaches are, wanting a moisture source as well, they tend to go for the nice, moist bait as soon as it's been applied. But it's going to have a moisture level there for close to 2 weeks or so, but it is actually still palatable going out for months. But if it's in an area where it's just highly conducive for cockroaches and there's lots of other food options for them to go after, and the cockroach bait has lost its moisture level, you could be really competing there and you might have to go out and reapply. So that's always a good idea to go back out, reassess, talk to the customers, make sure they're getting rid of any conducive conditions, and so that the bait doesn't have anything to compete against too much.
I can add some more to the first part of the question. So when I did a field trial with Advion Evolution and the other older version of Advion, I always did the sticky trap count. So that was one of the factors that helped me to decide how much more bait to apply. But you can also, if it's a smaller apartment and if you are applying it in certain locations, then you can check if the bait that was originally applied, if it has been completely consumed or not consumed, and maybe put out more bait if it has been completely consumed. Because sometimes, you apply bait and cockroaches maybe only eat half of it and then they die off. So more bait is left over there, which can remain palatable for maybe another month or so, or based on my lab study, it can stay palatable for up to 3 months. But another factor is that if you see cockroaches running around in the same place where you had originally applied bait, then maybe putting a few dabs here and there might help. So my experience has been, if you treat properly initially in the first try, then the amount of bait you have to put out in the next round of application is very less. So I don't know if that answer helps, but that was my experience.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. And just to add on to Ameya's too, is I think one of the biggest challenges that we deal with, especially in, like the HUD housing that we go into, is when bait is used, these accounts tend to be underbaited. So, a technician just doesn't have enough time to go in and treat these apartments appropriately. And they go in and, gosh, they might have 60 seconds to go into each apartment, and they put out some bait, and they're probably not putting the bait in the right places and not putting enough out. So you can see, from some of the work that we've done with Purdue and other universities that, we're going out and using at least a tube of bait per apartment. And sometimes, we're using 2 at the very beginning, and we come back in 2 weeks, it's all been consumed, and then we still got a small level of cockroaches, and we have to go in and reapply to make sure we get as much control as possible.
We had a question here about rotation. If you're rotating the products, as far as with the Advion and the Optigard, is it okay or recommended to do one right after another, or should you consider putting another industry product kind of in between that rotation?
Based on my experience, I think it's good to go right after, based on some limited data that I have collected so far. I think it gives good control when you are dealing with some of the tough strains that might be out there. But as you know, there are many products available, so there is a lot of choice.
We had a question here. The comment was that we do a lot of pre-baiting for rodents. Does pre-baiting work for cockroaches as well?
That has been suggested by some of the researchers, like pre-baiting, but I personally don't have any experience doing that. So maybe Dr. Gallagher can answer that question.
Yes, as far as I know, there's nothing published in the literature to show whether that's effective or not. If anybody knows of anything that's published there, please pass that along. I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing to do. I think it's good for areas where boxes might be being transported into an area for storage. So it's not an area that you typically have an infestation that's going on, but it's more about just trying to prevent an infestation from happening in case there's a cockroach or 2 that comes in with a cardboard box. So not a bad thing, but I wouldn't necessarily rely on it as your only measure of preventing an infestation.
Okay, one question we did get was a couple folks had mentioned they'd missed part of the recording or they want to hear it again. Will it be archived? Yes, we are recording it, and we'll provide a copy of that to Syngenta, so you can get a copy of that from your Syngenta rep, and we'll also post it up to PCT's website here in the next couple weeks. That's all we had as far as questions. I'm going to turn things back over to Nicky and Ameya if they have any final closing thoughts.
Brad, I just wanted to thank PCT Magazine again, and thank everybody for coming in to listen today. And I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of the bug season, and hope to see you at Pest World. And also wanted to thank Ameya, of course, for doing a wonderful presentation. And thank you so much, and learned lots of good things today.
Yes, same here. Thank you for organizing this webinar. Thanks to PCT, Brad Harbison, as well as Syngenta and Dr. Nicky Gallagher for organizing it. The slide that is up, I don't know if everyone can see, it has my email on it. So if you have any questions about cockroach control or anything else, please feel free to email me. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Nicky and Ameya. Again, appreciate the great presentation, and thanks to all of our participants for taking some time out of their day to be a part of the webinar. Have a great day, everyone.